Good.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Ewing Township Historic Preservation Society. It's February 1st, 2026. I'm so glad you're all here despite the cold weather. This is a very special day and we're so glad you're here. My name is Joanne Durham. I'm the president of the society. We have a wonderful board of directors and we have a great day ahead. This is the first program of 2026 for us for the 250th anniversary of our nation. And today we're very happy to have a program that deals with one of the key pieces of becoming a nation. I do welcome those who have not had a tour of the house to join me after this program in here. I will be giving a tour with Linda Brown and Becky of the house. And we are open the first Sunday of every month from 2 to 4 for tours. We're also open on Wednesdays, 10 to 2, so please join us. The last thing I want to mention is we do sell books here by Larry Kidder. And if you're interested in any of his books, please see me or Amy Karen, and she'll help you with that purchase. I want to introduce our immediate past president, Becky Urban, who is also a trustee and has worked so hard on this project.
Hello, thanks so much for coming. I'm not going to name all the different people on the board, but pretty much every member of the board and our special guest Patrick have worked to make what you see on the walls happen. It's been a long process. I think we've been working on this for about 3 or 4 years. Yes. We did it in 2 portions. We're so blessed with the fact that Patrick, who is one of the siblings of the last generation that's alive. Peter is his older brother and Kathleen, and they have been instrumental in making sure that all this information got put up on the walls and supplied enormous quantities of information for us. The initial part was to tell the family story, what their life on the farm was like. That's a lot of here. This is what the farm looked like when it was up on where Route 31 and 295 cross. Many of you may know that the house was moved in 1973 to this location. And that's when initially there was the Friends of the Benjamin Temple House and the Historic Society together that restored the building and made it possible for this to still exist as our headquarters. The actually still part of the first portion was we like in each room to tie in both the time period that people were living here and what history was going on at the same time. So you'll see that there's a lot of information about the Ryans. On the top and the bottom is the history of Ewing. Some of you do know that the other room, the Ben Temple parlor, is a much earlier period of time. The great thing I like to tell people is there are only 2 families here for 200 years, which is why this house still looks the way it does. And Patrick's mom was incredibly instrumental in making sure that the kids didn't destroy this part, right? They stayed out of it a lot at the time, or were told they had to take good care. The second phase is primarily 5 displays. We have over here, unfortunately Marge is not here, who did all the incredible work of labeling and identifying all the farms that existed in Ewing, and a key on like what they sold and how long they existed. Oh, she's here, you get your face in here.
Timing.
Right. I'm talking about your map right now.
Okay.
She's a researcher extraordinaire. She just does amazing work with maps and all kinds of things. Behind you on that far wall are our major 4 other displays. We again wanted to kind of give you an idea of not only how the Ryan family dairy operations existed, but also how they compared to other dairy farms in the area. And some of you may know, if you've lived in Ewing a long time, that basically Ewing was dairy farms. All the suburban areas that you now live in were a farm at one point pretty much, and pretty much sold dairy items. The next one is going to be important, and Patrick's going to talk a bit more about the connection of John Hart to this house and the location of the Hart family in terms of where they were located and where John Hart was born. The next one is we wanted to say, it's pretty sad, but all the farms are gone and now it's Suburbia. And we wanted to explain the transition and how it happened and when it happened. And the last one has been a very significant one for us too. is to look at both European immigration and African American migration to this part of the world. We were very lucky. Unfortunately, I don't see Mark Smith here today, but we interviewed him for our project called Voices of Ewing. And he told us about his great-grandmother who migrated from Virginia in the 1890s here and started St. John's Baptist Church. So if you're ever thinking you'd like to tell us your family's story and your connection to Ewing, we'd love to hear it. So Patrick is amazing memory, a good friend, and has helped provide constant help, constant answer of questions. Little graphic things all the time for us. Patrick did the map there of the whole farm, freehand at some point in his life. And, has been a constant source of help and information for this project. And we're going to let him talk today.
Okay, I will, Becky. I will. Thank you, Becky. You can sit over here.
No.
Okay.
He's gonna stay.
I was telling Greg earlier, I'm getting older, and just the thing of getting older, your short-term memory starts to get a little bit dicey, and they say that's a good thing. It's embarrassing to me because I'm going to have to rely on just a couple of notes here. I don't want to miss anything, and I'll try to move along because I'll urge you to look at the rest of the house upstairs and around. There's a Gale Cruiser room, of course, the temple parlor, the Drake family room, the old kitchen of the house. But I did want to mention two folks here who have a connection, although I don't think they ever realized it, and they're old friends. But this is, he's reading some. This is James Regan Kearney, and this is his brother Lincoln Kearney. And Regan and Lincoln Kearney's family, for about 60 years, ran the Trenton Times, a newspaper when it was a powerhouse newspaper in this part of the country. Their grandfather, James Kearney, really started the Trenton Times, and he was a personal friend of Woodrow Wilson's, and just after Wilson died, old James Kearney wrote a book called The Political Education of Woodrow Wilson. But the reason they are here today is through marriage, Regan and Lincoln are related to Gale Cruiser. And you all need to see the Gale Cruiser room and the portrait of Gale, because when it came time to save the house from demolition, Gale Cruiser was like a one-man band, and she saw it all the way through to all of the national and state and regional designations. The technical name which she chose for the applications is called the Temple-Ryan Farm, circa 1750. I provided Gail with some documents back in the early 70s from our family. Of course, she was more interested in the earlier history of the house. And then actually Jack McCarthy and I were here one day. I was showing a film and Gail was here, and I acknowledged her because she really was a sine qua non. If it had not been for Gale Cruiser, we'd probably not be here today, and this great old place would have been curtains, So Reegs, Lincoln, thank you. Becky asked me to tell a few stories, and Joanne, and some of you may have heard these, some of you may have not, but one that I'm very, very proud of is mentioned in that John Hart connection behind Jack McCarthy. We actually have a direct descendant of John Hart here today, Greg Monroe, who's right over there, who did a great video. He did Pieces to Camera up in Hopewell on John Hart, and he has just written a book on John Hart. And I think you may have incorporated this latest information. This is funny. The house is here, but the house was there. Growing up, I knew where John Hart was born before I knew who John Hart was. Because the Temple family had indicated on our old farm property where John Hart was born in 1713. We knew he was baptized over at the Maidenhead Church, but nobody ever really marked down where he was born. Well, we knew it because the Temples had told my Irish grandfather, who told my father, who told us. We didn't know that nobody else knew it until in Marge's library, I read a book by Cleon Hammond published in the late 90s, which verified that the last temple woman had said that John Hart was born down the lane near a spring with an old tree and some rough hewn or some smooth stones, and that was where John Hart, the signer, was born. As it turns out, the Hart family came originally from Long Island, but they owned a lot of this property on the other side of the house. And so that area, I mean, I was thinking, well, what's so important about this? It's just a little, etc. But we finally got all that settled out, and I'll take credit. I wrote the story and tapped into Princeton, and it's there. Then Greg and I got in touch, and Greg tells me that hopefully there's going to be some kind of a marker up on 31 near the Princeton Community Church behind it, and the vestiges of that undeniable spring are still there in some form. So, but it's funny because I really knew where the signer was born, Honest John, before I knew of his importance. And of course, he looms large today because he was one of the 5 signers of the Declaration from New Jersey, all of whom live within about a 30-mile radius of here. So anyway, say hello to Greg and read the John Hart thing. I wanted to point out something else. This is kind of funny, and I'm going quickly here. My dad used to love to try to get into New York once in a while. They always went to the Notre Dame Army game, of course, but my parents, it was the mid-40s, and my parents went into New York, and they went to a chain restaurant. Now, in the 40s, there weren't many chains, and it was called Child's Restaurant, and the waitress handed them the menu, and the front cover was a photograph of the farm. And my father said, well, that's nice, And the waitress said, well, you can have the menu. And the original is right there. I think a martini was 27 cents and the steak dinner was $1.27. But I'm putting in color commentary here, and I tend to repeat these stories whenever I talk, because sometimes it's the sizzle, not the steak, that ends up being, you end up thinking about it. One other thing is one of my favorite stories, and not many people know this. This down here was a branch of Shabakung Creek, and you can see it in some of the other pictures. There was a branch of Shabakung Creek that ended in a little pond, which the cows could drink from, and I actually had muskrat traps at one time, but it's in the summertime, and I was sitting on that fence, and it was getting dark, and it would have been in the early 50s, and I looked down toward the little pond, and there was a wagon there with a white horse, and the wagon was decorated, and it looked like tinker's wagons in the old days in Ireland. It had a little house on it, and they had a fire going, whoever they were, and I could hear some music, and of course some laughter and some voices. And my father came out, and I said, geez, Dad, he said, they're all right, Pat. He said, they're gypsies. And he said, their grandfathered in here. And he said, once every summer or every couple of summers, they take their wagons and they work their way along the Shabakunks. And he said, don't go down, don't bother them. But he said, he said, everybody around here allows them their passage. As years went by, I actually asked my brother and sister if they remembered it. They didn't, and I got to thinking maybe I had dreamed it. And then there's a book, another one of Marge's books. It's called Along the Banks of the Shabakunk, written by Richard Reeder Green or whatever from the Green family. And he corroborated that the gypsy caravans used to have the right of way along the Shabakunk. So it's an exotic memory of mine. Maybe I did sneak down, because Jack and my friends will tell you, I have been an Irish gypsy for all of my life. I end up always coming back here to make sure things are okay. Let me see. One other thing that's quite quaint is you'll see pictures of my dad with our draft horses, and they're everybody's favorite picture of Dad. Once a year, He used to take two of them and curry them, etc., and then trailer them out to the state fair when it was in Trenton. That's now the art for sculpture. And they never came in higher than second place, but Dad loved all animals. He especially loved the draft horses. When my dad was a kid, though, he was born in 1902. He was born on Dublin Road, actually, because we didn't move to the farm till 1903. But when my dad was a kid, the College of New Jersey, which was Trenton State then, the front entrance where all the stores are now, around 1910, 1920, that era, that was a professional thoroughbred racetrack. And they actually trained and boarded thoroughbreds there. But when the track wasn't being used, the owners allowed all the farmers to bring their own quarter horses and have country races. And my dad was a pretty good horseback rider when he was a kid. Now you had to know him though. He never wanted us to learn how to ride horses because he thought that they were finicky and you might get hurt. Now, it was perfectly all right to get hurt playing football or get hurt playing baseball or even boxing. But to do something stupid like to climb trees or climb up on top of the, up there in the top hayloft of the barn was just flat out, it was not in his lexicon. So while he was a good rider when he was a kid, he didn't want us to, he never wanted us to learn, but he loved those horses. He really did, yeah. One other thing, we need to put a plaque up sometime, and it's kind of an involved story. In a sense, it's a blessing that the house was saved, obviously, and it's now on Federal City Road because a lot of people in this part of the country don't understand that this area, being proximate to the river and close to Philadelphia, was on the short list to be the capital of the country until various things intervened. I think it was George Washington threw his weight behind an area down by Mount Vernon. I think it was also considered to be a temporary capital of the country after the British sacked D.C. in 1814. They thought about moving it to Philadelphia or to this area. And I think actually James Monroe, who was almost mortally wounded at the Battle of Trenton, had something to do with the idea in 1814. But it'd be great to publicize the fact that Federal City Road is Federal City Road because we could have been the capital of the country around here. I don't know how the name Bull Run Road came. I mean, we can think that it come from Manassas. I do know that dairy cows are placid. Occasionally they bust out of the fence and we would have to chase them down Bull Run Road, but we didn't name Bull Run Road Bull Run Road. But it's a great name though. Bull Run Road runs into Federal City Road. One last thing. My brother Peter is 10 years older than I am, so he'll be 91 in September, just about the time I turn 81. My brother actually knew more about the farm when it was a full tilt dairy farm and dairy bottling plant down in Parkway Avenue. By the time I came along, things were winding down. But Pete has written a long manuscript, his recollections of day-to-day life on the farm. He is turning that into a paperback, which will be available here. But if you want to know how to harness a draft horse, I mean, if you're riding along a highway someday and you see a Clydesdale, if you want to know how to harness a draft horse, or you want to learn how to milk a cow in 8 minutes, you can read my brother's thing. There will be his books available sometime to put alongside Larry's, Pete sends his regards, as does my sister Kathleen. Pete's in South Bend, Indiana. My sister Kathleen is down in Richmond, Virginia. My other older sister Maureen died several years ago, but we're the last 3 people that lived on the farm when it was still a working operation. So you'll be sure to take a look at Pete's stuff and then maybe take a look at the book when it arrives. This is the end. Pete's done a great job of writing. I do a little writing. Now, when I talk about what I write about, I always preface it by saying there was a a Broadway playwright named George S. Kaufman. He was a Jewish boy from Pittsburgh who found great success writing plays and musicals on Broadway. And after one of his first monetary victories, successes, he bought himself a yacht and a yachting cap. And he called his mama in Pittsburgh and he says, "Mama," he says, "I'm a captain." And she said, "Georgie, to me you're a captain. To you you're a captain. To a captain, you're not a captain." I do a little writing, but to me I can write. To a couple of my friends and some of my family, I'm a writer. To a writer, I'm not a writer. I may, however, piggyback on to Pete's thing eventually, a few fictional stories I wrote about the farm when I was a kid. And they both have to do with my brother playing the violin. My dad could play the violin, and my brother played the violin. By the time I came along, there was no money for music lessons. It was probably just as good. But one of the stories, this is fiction. Everything I've told you prior to this is fact. This is fiction. And I don't know where the story is. I'll try to dig it up. Is Pete's practicing now? This window faced out toward Pennington Road. So our front lawn was out this way. Pete's out alone, home alone, practicing the violin. And he looks out toward the Pennington Road, and there's an old man with a tattered sweater and wild hair, hands in his pockets, walking up the road, looking at the ground. There's a black car following him at a decent distance. Lo and behold, it's Albert Einstein. And Einstein hears my brother fiddling, and he comes up on the lawn, and my brother was practicing the Irish washerwoman, which is a famous old perky Irish jig. And Einstein attempted the German version of an Irish step dance. Then he asked my brother if he could borrow the violin, and my brother knew who he was and was awed and said, "Of course, Dr. Einstein." And Einstein played La Vie en Rose. Then they looked at each other. Einstein handed back the violin and said, he asked my brother's name, said, "Peter, I've come to a conclusion as my shadow's lengthening." And he said, "To hell with the atom. The key to the universe is music." And the second story has Pete playing the violin. He's on the front steps, practicing his arpeggios or whatever the hell they were. And a single engine plane lands in the cornfield, which was up along Route 31. It was fallow, hadn't been planted, but single engine plane lands. Who is Charles Lindbergh? And Peter puts down his violin, walks out to the cornfield. Lindy is getting out of the plane, and he says, "Young man," he said, "which way is Hopewell?" And my brother said, "Well, you go up this road, you know." He says, "Basically, it's that way." He said, "Thanks." He said, "Now," he said, "I got a favor to ask of you. I need you to cover me on this." He said, "Don't ever tell anyone that Lucky Lindy lost his way." And my brother told me, but now I'm telling you, it's fiction. Anyway, thank you all for coming. It's a